I mean, I never dreamed of being a period activist when I grew up. Like, for me, I truly mean it that like activism is what saved my life when I really needed it, and it has been just this addicting empowerment for me. I started my organization when I was 16, and my passion for periods comes from a really personal place. My family also, similar to your story, very different. We found ourselves living without a home of our own when I was 16. And during that time, my commute to school turned to about 2 hours long each way on public transportation. And regularly on that journey, I would hear these stories from other homeless women who were in much worse living situations than I was in. I started asking them, like, what's the most challenging thing about your living situation? And that's where I heard these stories of using toilet paper and socks and brown paper grocery bags and cardboard to take care of their periods. And it was this privilege check for me in realizing, even in this time when my family was facing this adversity, like how privileged I was never to have thought about what it would be like to not have access to period products. And I think for me at the time, at the age of 16, I was coming to the realization that I grew up with child and sex abuse in my own family. I found myself in a really abusive relationship where rape and sexual assault were sort of this daily part of my life that I accepted because I think there was part of me that felt like I deserved it, part of me that thought it felt super familiar, but also part of me that was genuinely confused about how my self-worth could come from something beyond my body. And when I started hearing about periods and these stories about period poverty, it lit this fire in me of like, are you fucking kidding me? Like, that was really my reaction. Like, I remember Googling and learned that at the time in 2014, 40 states in the US had a sales tax on period products, considering them luxury items. Meanwhile, products like Rogaine and Viagra nationally are considered essential goods and don't have that tax. And when I learned about that and I started talking to people, and I would realize, especially for the older white gentlemen in my life, like that I would come to them and be like, let me talk to you about this thing about periods and what I'm learning about, and they would literally make this disgusted face, right? And I noticed that within a few minutes of telling them about what I was learning, I could convince them to be a period warrior with me. And that realization, realizing that I had power just in talking about this issue, made me realize that my self-worth came from much more than my body, but came from my voice and my potential and my passion. And that was so addicting that it's what gave me the courage to get out of a lot of the situations I was in, that gave me the motivation to do what I do now. And how I think of leadership truly is I can only be a leader if I'm empowering others to be leaders themselves. And so activism for me has saved my life and empowered me to be a leader. And what my mission is just to give other young people, especially, the platform to be activists and leaders themselves.
Beautiful.
Thank you. What you're referring to, this phenomenon where women's symptoms and feelings are being dismissed and minimized, is what we, sort of in the menstrual movement, as we call it, that's what we call the trust gap, right? This idea that so often women are going to their doctors talking about their period pain or their hormonal changes, and it's being dismissed as period cramps or just PMS, right? But in the reality, there are so many conditions that are related to periods that cause so much pain or discomfort. One of the most common ones being endometriosis. So endometriosis is a condition that 10% of women, and actually probably more than that, have in the US. But the majority of women who have it don't know that they have it because it's really hard to diagnose. And the symptoms are basically extreme versions of cramps, right? Mm-hmm. But because of the period stigma, we barely learn to talk about our own periods, right? Let alone like talk to other people about our periods. And for medical professionals, for them, they don't really know how to ask the right questions about periods too. So much of our work, especially with underrepresented communities, is not only telling them about what questions to ask and telling them about the different conditions to inquire about, but also working with medical health professionals to tell them what endometriosis is. And I'm always surprised by how many doctors I meet who have not heard about them or not ever met a case of uterine fibroids. So it's something that we're really working on within the health industry. At the same time, I would say education and raising awareness is the link to making systemic change. In complete honesty, I don't think that nonprofits and what I'm doing right now as a nonprofit leader is making long-term change. Because I realized that at the end of the day, if my organization disappeared and our direct services stopped, in 10, 20 years from now, those same people probably won't have access to period products, right? For me, I do think that the long-term goal of making systemic change is to change the system itself through policy. But I realized And I realized that in order to do that, we have to pass legislation that gets period products in schools, in shelters, in prisons, repeals the tampon tax, gets things like the food stamps to cover period products as necessity, which they currently don't. But I've met so many people who work in policy and legislators, and it becomes apparent to me that we cannot change and pass that policy until we change culture, until we get those legislators even comfortable to say periods or tampons on the House floor, right? Until we can get constituents to know that when they see a tax code about period products, they know what that means, right? So for us, my end goal is not about periods. My end goal is about gender equality, and I just know that we have to address periods to get to gender equality. And in order to do that, we need to pass this policy, and the link to get there is education and raising awareness.
Yeah, very well put. And you know, and as a parent too, and parents too, fathers and mothers, when you talk to your daughters, it shouldn't be in hushed tones with shame. It's like a beautiful, natural thing. It actually is it's great news, but it's like this bad thing's gonna happen and you have to do this, and I've never really understood that. We had a red party for my daughter when she was 14. And we celebrated with all the girls in her school.
But I think it's even acknowledging that it's a big deal for you to come out and say like period, because I mean, for so long, I mean, everyone has these euphemisms for periods, right? Like I was getting my makeup done with them earlier, and she said, I call it Shark Week, right? But like Shark Week, Strawberry Week, the rag, time of the month, we all know these euphemisms, and we all have these like shared experiences of like, raise your hand if you have the experience of putting a tampon up your sleeve, right? Right? But like the fact that without saying it, we have these shared experiences because society and the stigma conditions us to know to hide it, to have these nicknames for it when we don't want to say the word period, and to hide the period products when we go to the bathroom, and that's what we're trying to end.
Yes, thank you.
I never really have a plan, and I think if anything, I've just learned that you just have to go for it, right? Like when I wanted to do something about periods, I decided I wanted to start a nonprofit, and I didn't know what the fuck that meant. I just knew that adults in my life use the word nonprofit to signify like doing something good for your community. And so I Googled what is a nonprofit and what is the IRS. And without a plan, I was just like, let's take action. Let me look at my friends and be like, we don't have a plan. We don't have a nonprofit degree, but we're going to go for it. And that same mentality is what carried me to do that. It carried me to run for office when I was 19. I ran for city council and became the youngest Asian American to run for office in the US. But when I was running for office, I Googled, thank you. But when I was running for office, I Googled, what does it take to run for office? Realized that you had to be 18, and I felt overqualified because I was 19, and we did it, right? But I think that that's the mentality of like, we live in this world where we're always asking young people, what do you want to be when you grow up, right? The reality is, we don't know. We're still living life, we're still figuring out what we want. So I think the question should be, what do you want to be now? And if that question, the answer to that question happens to be something in the menstrual movement, you can find out more about period at period.org. Or connect with me on social media at Nadia Okamoto or at Period Movement. And we have so many ways to get involved, from hosting a packing party, to starting a chapter, to signing a petition. We want you wherever we can get you in this period fight. Yeah.
Wow, amazing. You are both so incredibly brave and inspiring, and I hope when I grow up and figure out what I want to do, I am with you.